I guess the question when we were first talking about having a conversation about abortion rights was, are we going to talk about Roe versus Wade, which is a legal question, or are we going to talk about abortion? Because those are really two different things. Like one of them has to do with, is there a right in the Constitution to an abortion? And the other is should people be allowed to get abortions? I mean, the larger question, the bigger question.
But I think our audience is also going to want to see if we're going to be successful in arguing out this conversation.
Well, I think, just to our title of Argue in Peace, I think people are like, can two people with opposite views on abortion not come to blows or call each other, evil, awful, terrible, and can we argue in peace? Can you argue in peace on, I think it's very funny that one of the first substantive issues that you and I are really sitting down and having a recorded conversation about, I mean, we talk about every issue all the time in our friendship, but one of the first recorded conversations we're having is about potentially the hottest hot button issue that's out there right now.
It is. It's always been a hot topic.
It's always been a hot topic.
It ever came up in your practice?
Abortion issues? Yeah. No, not really. It doesn't, because, I mean, there are some arguments that happen about stored embryos and things like that. There's a lot of things that have happened in reproductive law. So people have like frozen embryos, stored embryos that are already fertilized. And so when people get divorced, there's a question of like, okay, what do we do with those embryos? And that raises those bigger questions about, I mean, again, abortion comes down to this idea of when does life begin? What is life? What life do we have a right to terminate? Who gets to make that decision? When it comes to things like frozen embryos, you've got mom's egg, you've got dad's sperm. It's a fertilized egg at this point, but it was put together during a marriage. It could theoretically be used to increase somebody's child support 8% post-divorce if it was taken to term. So, and the guy's not going to be able to say like, oh, well, I'll put that egg in some other lady. So it's kind of a different,
It's complicated. I mean, I one time saw, I think this was like 12, 15 years ago, there's one of these like court TVs, like arbitration judge jury shows. Yeah. I forgot who it was.
People love those shows.
Yeah. They're actually really entertaining.
Yeah. I guess
like
watching not arbitration. For me. It's just not for me.
Yeah, for lawyers can't stand it. Lawyers can't stand it. It's
right.
like, it's not fun.
It's kind of what we wish court was like. That you could go in and just say whatever
you want, and then the judge just says whatever they want.
Yeah, and the judge just is off the dome just saying, you're like, arbitration. That's crazy. Like
Besden, arbitration.
Is that what it is?
Same exact thing.
Have to convert. I'm telling you, this might be the
same exact thing. And there was one time a case where somebody was asking for child support, and the judge was like, okay, so why aren't you paying child support? And the guy said, well, I asked her to have an abortion.
Oof.
Okay. This is on YouTube. You could see this on YouTube.
That's rough.
And you see the court, the stance, because everyone's paying attention to the audience, laughing. And the stance turns against the guy.
Yeah.
The judge, reports him, tells the lady, report him to take the kid away. And he's crying. He's like, I love my kid. Because he's acting that attitude, basically. He's like, I love my kid. He was crying. He's like, I love my kid. I don't want to pay the money because I told her I can't afford it when she became pregnant. And I told her not to bring the kid in. I love my kid. And you see the judge being confused, like, what do I do now? The guy says he wishes his kid wasn't there. The mother's holding the kid. The kid was in the courthouse.
Well, I don't know that he's saying that. I mean, see, this is the lawyer in me, but I don't know that he's saying that. I don't know that he's saying, I wish the kid wasn't there.
Let's drop the law. What do you think the audience thinks when they see that? That argument, a guy's in there saying, I don't want to pay child support.
Like, I have to tell you, man, I'm so
passive audience.
Yeah, like, like the booze don't mean much to me because I know what people cheer for. So like when I look at the reality of like what's a popular opinion, I kind of go, well, I don't really care that it's popular. It might just mean it's really stupid, that it's stupid enough that most people understand it. Here's what I'll tell you. I'll tell you a story from my own practice. I had a client who it was going to be weaponized against him in a custody proceeding for a 3-year-old that he had pushed for her to have an abortion.
Okay.
And she had emails and text messages where he had really was trying to convince her to have an abortion. And I knew this was coming. I knew that this was going to be part of it because they didn't have much on the guy. He'd been a very good father. He really was like, this kid was born, they separated, they'd never married. And he was, from the time the kid was born, very involved in the child's life. And he was now saying, I want joint custody or, I want custody if there has to be a choice. And I knew that this is something she was going to try to hit him with. So I got ahead of it, in his direct examination. Rather than letting the other side on cross beat him up with it, I got ahead of it. And I said to him, and I prepared him for this testimony, but it was honest testimony. And I said to him, isn't it true that you encouraged her to terminate the pregnancy? And he said, yes, I did. And I said, in fact, you were emphatic about the fact that she should terminate the pregnancy. He said, yes. And I said, Why did you want her to And he was honest. He said, look, I was terrified at the time. I knew that this relationship was toxic. I didn't know that it would be good to bring a child into the world who, was going to be brought into conflict between two people who didn't really love each other and didn't have stability. His own parents were divorced. And he said, like, I saw how hard that was for me growing up. And then I said to him on direct, I said, are you glad she didn't listen to you? And the guy legit started crying on the stand. And it was organic. It was real. And he said, I'm so glad she did. And I love my son so much. I'm so glad my son exists. And when I look at those texts, when I look at those emails, when I think about that, I'm so angry at myself. I'm so disgusted with myself. I'm so grateful that she didn't listen to me. And I think what would have happened if she had and how awful that would have been. So, I think it can be a very powerful testimony. I don't think the fact that someone was encouraging someone to have an abortion, that's a function of fear. I mean, when you tell me that story about this guy said, well, look, I told her she should have an abortion so I shouldn't have to pay child support. I hear that as him saying, I told you I don't have the money to raise a child. And then you had a child. And now you're saying, give me some money to raise the child. I told you I didn't have the money to raise the child. Now, the question is if you can't afford to have a child, does that mean you should be able to impose onto someone the obligation to prevent that child from being born? And I think that's a totally different question. But I think there are very valid reasons. I don't think you, even as a person who's anti-abortion perhaps, would say there aren't reasons people wouldn't want to have a child that are valid reasons not to want to have a child.
100%. What makes you think that I'm anti-abortion?
Well, I'm assuming you're a religious man. I don't know. I thought God was pretty settled on the issue, but he and I haven't spoken in a while.
Yeah.
So.
I
was going to be funny there and say, I think God is settled on the issue, but she and I haven't talked in a while, But then I'm just picking a fight.
Yeah. I actually saw a community. It's just so funny to see ignorance, and ignorance is so bliss for so many people.
Yeah.
Like they now need to show that God's a woman. So
right,
they found all the feministic Hebrew words, and when they have to bless God, they changed it.
They changed it to feminine. See, I was raised Catholic, and I'm still a recovering Catholic, and so I have a tendency to use a masculine pronoun for God, but I never actually thought God has a penis. Like I never actually thought about that, I never really, because I would assume, like, I don't want to sound like, what's his name, Matt, whatever, like, what is a woman, but I really do think that, which, I do think that if we're defining the sex characteristics as being, genital based in some fashion, like, I don't know that God has genitals, so I don't know.
You know what's very, very cool? The first, how far back do you, I studied the topic of abortion. I studied the topic really, really well. Yeah. Unbiased. That means I studied the first time this topic even came into my brain was like when I was like 11 years old. We actually had a class.
You were a weird kid.
No. This was in school. Yeah. My whole class. We were a bunch
of
weird.
We were a bunch of weird
kids.
Yeah.
But I would say when I was 11, 4th, 5th grade, we had a biblical class, and the class was if another guy is fighting with his friend and he ends up punching a pregnant lady and she ends up having a miscarriage, he should pay her husband the value of the child. So everyone asked, well, why wasn't killing? He killed. Right. When you kill someone, you don't pay money. You get the death penalty, right? And over the year, it's a whole discussion. Well, so that's where it started the first time. We don't end the discussions because we don't know everything, but it's the first time. And then it gets more complicated. Like when I was in university in Israel, I promise you, if you ever go to Israel and you ever come with me, you have to check out where
If I go, I'm coming with you.
Oh, you got to go. So
I feel like you're like my man on the inside in Israel.
Yeah, no. But I studied in a university in Israel. It's crazy hard to get into. It is so complicated to survive there. About 1,200 single and married guys in one small building. The dining room table that the main lecturer is done, right? That means the main rabbi, the main master, the dean. Right. His class is still done on the same dining room table of his grandfather who gave the same class in that same room.
Wow.
And they're like 500 guys. We sit on stools like this.
Wow.
And it's an hour and a half lecture. Yeah. And it's it's literally like this. It's these most complicated hour and a half classes.
Yeah.
It takes weeks to study them. And there's a question in the laws of bringing sacrifices that a lady has a baby, she's supposed to bring a sacrifice. Okay, it's a nice thing. She's supposed to say thank you to God. What happens if she has a miscarriage? She's also supposed to bring a sacrifice. Not as a thank you, more as like, we need to get to a better place type of thing, right? It's more of like, what happens if she has a miscarriage in the first 40 days? So the Talmud says that's not considered a child.
For the first 40 days?
Yeah. So she doesn't bring that sacrifice.
Interesting.
So by us in university, they gave a whole hour-and-a-half class to say that in the laws of sacrificing, it's not considered a child. But in life and death, it could be considered a child. Mm-hmm. You understand? Like that split?
I get it, yeah. And
it's like a real legal split.
But you drive into what I think is the key point. And it's the problem I have with how the left and the right both approach this topic. Because I think most rational people would agree that a 19-week-old fetus is not the same as a newborn kid, right? A newborn baby, a baby that is now, or even like, let's take it a step further, a 1-year-old, right? It's obviously not the same. But we agree that because like, you know, the metaphor I always use, or the thing I always stumble on, is because I happen to be someone I identify as pro-choice, and I believe in the right to abortion. I also don't, I mean, I think there is something funny about the fact that we have like two dudes here talking about something we'll never have to do, which is carrying a baby to term. You know,
yeah,
like we're talking about a right or a responsibility that neither of us will ever actually have.
That's why I said I discussed the topic, like when we discussed it in university, we discussed it unbiasedly. Like it's relative to sacrifices in our mind.
Right.
It's relative. It's the conversation we're having.
Where I stumble is, you know, I think we can all agree that a 15-week fetus is not life, okay, in the sense of it's not a child, in the sense of the term that this is the same as a 1-year-old, this is the same as a newborn baby. But we can also agree it's not nothing. Like when someone, you know, a lot of my progressive liberal friends will say to me, well, it's a cluster of cells, it's a cluster of cells. You know, at 5 weeks, it's a cluster of cells. At 10 weeks, it's a cluster of cells. And I understand why they're saying that. But like if that same person was pregnant and wanted to be pregnant and had a miscarriage at 15 weeks, and I said, well, it's just a cluster of cells, I would be a monster. That's a horrible thing to say to someone. What you would really say to someone who wanted to have a child and who had a miscarriage at 15 weeks is, I'm so sorry, and that must be difficult for you, and I'm here for you. I mean, you would treat that as, so even a progressive liberal, if they're being honest, is going to say, okay, this isn't nothing, but is it a full-on something that deserves the full protection of law, the same as a newborn baby would have, or a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old would have? And I think most people would say, if they're being honest, no, it's not exactly the same. So this is where I think the debate gets murky, and it's also dangerous because people don't want to get to the core of the debate. See, the reason I assumed that you're anti-abortion.
Could be I am. We're going to get...
I assumed it only because we probably have differing definitions of when life begins and differing definitions on the sanctity or sacred nature of life, because you have underneath that a religious view and I don't.
You know what? I don't think my view of abortion contradicts that.
Okay.
I dated back.
So what is your view of abortion?
So I dated a very interesting, it's a very weird answer, really, really weird answer.
I would expect nothing less from
you. And yeah, and it's still a work in progress.
I would expect nothing less from you than the following 3 things that you just said. 1, your view's a work in progress.
Thank
2,
you.
It's heavily informed by a lot of things that you've read and studied and debated about.
Probably.
Right? And 3, it draws from secular as well as religious perspectives.
And it's going to be weird.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
So
this is why we get along.
Great,
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
So on the same page.
Yeah.
The best parable that I found to explain it, the best, is I found a piece of work, and I'll even tell you the thought process. Maimonides, most of his philosophy, he attributes to Aristotle. Mm-hmm. Now the question is why? Because he had enough sources on his own. That means Aristotle, with all his works, doesn't come up to the amount of the Talmudic literature that's out there, right? Maimonides had a lot to write about, and a lot of sources that he could have easily said was written by the Talmud. He quoted Aristotle. Now, there's a question why. There's 3 easy reasons. A, it's a cool thing. It's like what I'm trying to do. If you could even quote Aristotle, right, and you could even say that the secular world agrees to it. Right. Like, so you're not saying such an inspirational thing. You're saying something much more rational.
It's street credibility.
Street credibility. Yes. That's one. And it could be. But then there are those that say that he shouldn't call him my master. When he quotes him, sometimes he's like, my master Aristotle. Like, that's a little bit too much. Like, you could quote someone for credibility. You could quote a Nietzsche. You're not going to be like, hey, Nietzsche's my master.
My man
right?
Nietzsche.
You know, I get no, it'd be my man Nietzsche, but it's not going to be like my master.
My
like,
master
you know,
Nietzsche,
like whatever.
The boss.
And it could be, you have to understand that Aristotle, you see, the Jewish people had a crazy tradition
Just one?
This is the worst from all of them, and this is the only one we didn't keep. You know, we're not allowed to write down any of our laws. It always has to be oral. And about 15...
If only the legal system truly codified that, because I find judges can't remember much of anything. So when I have an opportunity, I could be like, no, judge, that's not what that law said. It said this, you know?
Well, before computers, you for sure could. No, but Judaism can't do it for another reason. When you write something and you have to articulate it so well on paper, you minimize the idea. And you might minimize it forever.
Interesting.
It's a long topic we could talk about. Yeah. But when Christianity blew up in year 500, the rabbis felt, based on a prophecy, that it said there's going to come a time that you could do the opposite of the Torah in order to keep the Torah. Right. And they said they're going to write everything. And they picked certain things to write down. That was done 600 years after Aristotle. So you could say, okay, Maimonides wanted to quote a book that was the earliest book. There's that argument. Aristotle was pro-abortion, believe it or not. He held the excess of children based on your own, like how many children you decide, 2, 3, done, finished. The excess of children, money you could abort. Right. But he quotes when he says that you should look in Plato's work, where he came from, in Plato's book, The Law. Plato's book, The Law, is a fascinating book. In there, he's recording a conversation, according to Aristotle, is between Socrates and other individuals discussing what would happen if Minos, which nobody knows who Minos is, but I believe it's Moses, would re-give over laws from Zeus, which is going to be a parable to a god. Now, what would he do? So it was about, let's say, Jewish law was given 3,334 years ago, almost approximately, in the years approximately, we're off a few months. We're talking about 500 BC, right? So we're talking about 1,000 years after Moses gave it. What would he do now? And in the middle of the conversation, they start discussing abortions. And this is what they say, and it's crazy radical. Socrates says like this, he says, now that we finished discussing that we must have law, how are we going to figure out to have laws that are private for people and their family? Socrates says, well, you have two choices. Either you say, well, we're going to create law for everybody, but nobody's going to keep it deep down. And then you're going to make a mockery of the system called law if you're not going to enforce people to keep the law.
Sure, if it's performative in nature.
Right, exactly. Or you're not going to make law, and then everybody is not going to trust their neighbors, and you're never going to have anyone build a community. Because if I don't know your opinions about certain things, like if someone's so pro-choice, right? And my wife is pregnant and she wants to be stringent on fish and she says, look, it's really dangerous for the kid. And they're like, okay, but you don't know my respect to what that kid is, right? Or that fetus is. Like, I can't trust that. Maybe in a car accident, you're not going to drive as safe. Like, we have to build. So Socrates said, even though law should not get involved in family matters, if you ever want to have a community that could ever get along and build trust with each other, you have to create law that people don't want to keep, because it has to be some type of universal relationship that everybody agrees on. And Aristotle understood it.
Help me understand that little piece, though. You said that you have to have law that people don't want to keep?
No, you have to have law in topics that that are family and private, which people aren't going to want to keep, and they might bend, even though it will make a mockery of law itself, because people are going to defy the law, but you still have a sense of community.
Now I understand. Yep.
But then he ends off like this, right? So that's a deep topic. Like, hey, you need to have community, because or else how are we going to trust each other, and how are we going to grow, and how are we going to develop?
Right, we have to have common
ground.
Correctly, you're saying we have to have common things we believe in. We have to have common, what Todd Gitlin called our common dreams, like common sense of what principles, basic core principles that bring us
basic
together.
Rules that we could trust each other in a conversation.
Whether we fully follow them or not, and that's very much like Freud's Civilization and its discontents. The idea that to have community, you have to have
Freud criticized
some discomfort.
Freud criticized this in his book. In his book, Civilization, he's criticizing this idea. But before that, Socrates ends off with these words, and it's not quoted. I Googled, I searched, Command F. I did every single thing to make sure it's never quoted again in any of his works. He says, and this is what I refer to as dark speech. He ends that paragraph. Like, basically, this contradiction right, which is community and law, like that contradiction is what I call dark speech. And dark speech is what Plato referred to as why Socrates was put to death. You ever read The Last Days of Socrates? Yes. And I recommend anybody who's listening to just even go on YouTube and listen to the audiobook of The Last Days of Socrates. The Last Days of Socrates does something crazy. Plato basically articulates something crazy. And this is, you see, Moses, some people aren't sure if he existed. Jesus, we're not sure if he existed. Muhammad. Socrates, there's no debate. Right. Plato wrote a real authentic understanding of The Last Days of Socrates. And there are 4 things that happen. 1, he meets somebody and he gaslights that person. That means he meets a person who says, Socrates, I heard you going on trial. Yeah, he's like, yeah, they're coming after me. Why? Because he was corrupting the youth, which they say about anybody. Right. Like he was manipulating everybody. Sure. He was teaching them wrong outlooks in life. And this person asked him, why are you coming to court? He's like, I'm coming to take my father. He's like, how could you take your father to justice? It's your father. And he's like, what do you mean? My father did something illegal. Should someone stop? Now, we don't know if this is true or not, but he basically goes into a conversation and he contradicts the person and says, you don't know what you're talking about. Right. Okay, good. And then you don't hear the trial. You don't hear the plaintiff. You just hear him defending himself. And he basically, through the defense, he says, you're accusing me that I don't have a God. I don't have ideas because all I do is ask questions. And I live my life based on the questions. So, for example, if you're going to ask Socrates why he had feet, he'll say to walk. Okay, why do you have to walk? Right. To get things. Well, why do you have to get things? Right. And you're going to develop philosophy by continuing to ask questions and don't stop. Doesn't mean I don't believe in a God. Right. I believe that wisdom is found in the study of nothingness. Sure. It's like there's this words in Proverbs, in Job. Okay, the crazy words. Jung based a lot of his psychology and trauma based on these words. He said, wisdom is found in the study of nothingness. That means there's certain unanswered questions, like black speech, dark speech, and you got to study that. Now, Socrates was put to death because of this. Put that on the side. Dark speech is what I believe George Washington said when he read the Constitution for the first time. George Washington gave a speech. It's a fascinating speech, and I don't know if we talk about it because a lot of people want to cancel George Washington, but he basically said these words. He said, what do you want from me to become a president? I have my views. I have my values. He said, I'm comfortable. I retired. Right. Like basically, I have my opinion. Right. So you want to come and you want me to do what? You want me to answer questions to a land that I can't hear. Right. Which is like the Constitution, in God we trust, means that there's going to be tons of unanswered questions. Sure. Religion answers a lot of questions, but we came to America for that freedom and say, no, my God, my hierarchy of values, the highest idea is going to govern me. Right. But there's going to be questions till you reach that idea, and you're not going to have answers. And then George Washington says, all I could do is this. All I could do is show you that I'm not biased. That's it. And I think when we have questions like dark speech, which is, according to Socrates, the foundation of the question of how the state should get involved in abortion, the answer is just what's your bias when you're sharing me your opinion? Because I don't believe abortion is a final topic. I think it's hiding behind another topic. Like, how come we're not talking about why there's so many abortions? I mean, there's protections. How come we're not talking about so many people maybe who are trying to hurt themselves? Because like, if abortion's unnecessary, nobody enjoys it, right? And it's scary. Right. So are there systems to protect yourself from abortion? I mean, in the Jewish community, right, you don't have a child until you get married. There's less of a chance you're going to want to abort then. Sure. But even if not, there are systems to protect you. We weren't born yesterday. Yeah. We're not going to ever hit those questions because we decided to do something smarter than Socrates. We decided to answer. Sure. What's our answer? Pro this. We believe in this. We have all the answers because we have hypothetical questions. Well, what's your opinion about rape? And what's your opinion about incest? And what's your opinion? Right. You know what? I don't believe there's an answer to abortion. So then what should we do as a state? In God we trust. How do we have a communal grounds? I think the government should say, you know what? States, communities, work together and come with a decision. Make a vote together. Maybe you have to ask your doctor before you abort. Maybe you have to ask a rabbi, a priest, a therapist, a psychologist, a fireman, maybe a judge. Maybe you yourself can make the decision. Personally, I don't think anyone should ever carry that decision on themselves to make an abortion. I think they have to speak to a third-party person.
The decision So the decision to create a life we can make autonomously, but the decision to end a life
I don't think the decision to create a life, you have to ask another person.
That's not true. Why would you have to ask another person?
I mean, unless you want to go to a bank, you need two people.
Well, but you need a person to have sex with you. It doesn't mean I'm on the pill. I'm a woman. I say I'm on the pill. We have sex. I get pregnant. I know I'm getting pregnant. I mean, I can unilaterally make a decision.
You're lying to someone? Sure. So what's the consequences of that? Let's discuss that.
Of what?
A guy, a lady, because I've had this on the Jewish, I've had this in Bezdin over and over, and in secular court I read so much about this, but a lady who becomes pregnant without the consent of her spouse.
Sure.
Right? And a lady who also aborts without the consent of her spouse. Is that grounds for divorce? Let's go back to 1990, where you needed grounds for divorce in the United States of America. Not such a long time ago. It means the radical left will be like, what? You needed grounds for divorce? Yeah. I mean.
Well, you still needed grounds in 2000 almost. It was No Fault didn't pass.
No Fault took a while. And by the way, that's.
Because one of my first trials 21 years ago was a grounds trial.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting topic, the grounds trial. But let's say you civilly married, which means a commitment, and you need a civil divorce.
No, there's a contradiction here without question. That if a man does not want to be a father, right, that a woman can impose upon him the financial obligations attendant to fatherhood when she's been impregnated by him. But a law will not impose parental obligations on him. You can't impose legally parental obligations on a person other than, like New York State, basically it boils down to you don't have to have kids. You don't have to spend time with kids if your kids were born. But if you have kids, you got to pay for them.
Yeah.
That's the law.
100%. The question is, I'm talking about, let's block a second before the law. Grounds. A guy says, I don't want to be married to you anymore.
Right.
Right? Is he a bad man? He tells his wife, we made up not to have another child. Right. You promised me we're not in that place.
Right. We're not going to
financially, emotionally. Right now, we're taking a 7-year break. We don't know where we are. And she wanted to maintain the marriage.
Right.
So she became pregnant. Or she wanted to make sure he doesn't leave her.
Right.
Or he wanted her his finances. Many different things that are being done.
Right.
Did she do something wrong?
Morally wrong?
I'm asking you. Would you be friends with such a? Would you do a business deal with such a person?
Kinds of awful people.
I know, but
and thank God other people are friends with me.
Would you trust such a person?
Would I think that's a complex question, because would I trust the person to have a baby with me? No, but would I trust that person? Like, that person may be trustworthy on other things. I think the challenge in the question that you're asking is, like, what is the weight that should be given to, because the reasons why someone may want to have a child are as complex as the reasons why someone may not want to have a child, right? Like, it may be that the marriage is ending and this person's concerned that they're going to be lonely and they want to have some connection to another living thing, so they'd like to have a piece of this person. Or they're hopeful they don't actually even want to have a kid, but they want some physical tie to this other person that might motivate them to stay in the marriage. The reasons why people have children, the reasons why people don't want to have children are complex, multivariate. I mean, one of the things you said a few minutes ago that I think is very intriguing, but I don't know where you go with it, is it would be better if we as a society asked, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but it would be better if we got to the fundamental question of why would anybody want to have an abortion? Like, why would anybody not want to have a baby?
That I understand. I think we discussed
but what is the problem that is causing us? Like, abortion is a technology, right? And anytime I encounter a technology of any kind, like this microphone's a technology. Like, this table's a technology. Neil Postman, in Amusing Ourselves to Death, or some of his other writing, talks about how you should analyze any technology by asking some basic questions when you encounter it. What is the problem to which this technology is a solution? Who has that problem? How does it solve the problem from a practical standpoint? And what new problems will it create, unintentionally or intentionally, right? So it's easy when you do it with something like a table. You know, what is the problem to which this table is a solution? We need to put stuff on things. We don't want to have everything be on the floor. It's going to get knocked over easily. Who has that problem? Pretty much anybody in a room has that problem. Pretty much anybody who has some things they might need to put down. How does it solve the problem? It gives us some place to put things. What new problems does it create? All kinds of things, right? It creates the problem of I need coasters now because I don't want to get, stain on the thing. It creates a problem of there's, people are going to want to buy tables and they're going to have to be made from some resource, so we'll have to cut down trees. So there's second order effects that you have to think about. All right, so abortion. What is the problem to which abortion is a solution? It's the problem of an unwanted pregnancy, right? Period. That might be for health reasons. It might be for personal reasons. It might be for economic reasons. It might be for any number of reasons. Who has that problem? Women primarily have that problem because they have to carry a child to term, but men have that problem too.
Let's make believe it's only women for argument.
Okay.
For argument's sake,
okay.
Only women have the problem.
Okay, so how does it solve the problem? It terminates the pregnancy, okay? And what other problems will it unintentionally or intentionally cause? That's a long list potentially.
So I would say someone like Socrates would counter that like this. He would say that the way you're addressing the argument is like asking someone why they have feet. They're going to say to walk, and they're going to make all sorts of determinations based on this new philosophy that the idea of feet is walking. Who said you have to walk? I mean, maybe you ever read Harry Potter? You can make things come to you, right? There's that idea. So maybe the idea of feet is way bigger than just walking, and it could accomplish way more. And you're basically minimizing and killing the idea by establishing that what the problem is unwanted pregnancy.
Sure.
Maybe it's unwanted physical contact. Maybe the majority of abortions maybe are rape and incest, and we have to figure out how to do something with that. And that's bigger than just abortion. That's trauma. That's way bigger than maybe just an abortion. That lasts way longer than just the trauma of the abortion lasts. Maybe we're not going to get there because we already determined that the answer is what we want to fight about right now. We want to kill each other right now because we're so in the present, our generation. We're so now, I don't think we care about in 30 years what's going to end up being. And right now, this is the trauma that we're dealing with. Where's our government going? Who's going to have the choice? Yeah, and those are all amazing topics. But are we going to be minimizing the discussion when we fight the way the radical right and radical left are fighting?
I think we are. I think you and I 100% agree on that the debate that's currently happening is not the debate that needs to happen.
Exactly.
But it's an easier debate, right?
So easy.
It's an easier debate. So people like the hard thing to do and the right thing to do are almost always the same thing. So in this situation, like I'm a lawyer. I'm a pro-choice lawyer. Roe needed to be overturned. 100%. Roe was bad law. Now, I say that as someone who absolutely supports a woman's right to have a safe, legal abortion on demand for any reason. Simply, I do not want to be pregnant anymore. I support that. I believe in that. I do not have to carry a child to term. I don't believe I have the right to tell a woman she has to carry a child to term. Under your skin is under your sovereignty. Period. As far as I'm concerned. It's the same argument that people embrace when talking about mask mandates and things like that. The reality is this is your body, this is your skin, this is your sovereignty. Now, I believe in that. And there's a debate to be had against that, and I'm happy to have that debate. But to say that is rooted in the Constitution and that our founding fathers and the framers of the Constitution intended for there to be in the Constitution a direct or implied right to an abortion is insane. It's insane. Substantive due process.
I don't think anyone on the left, forget about the radical left. I don't think anyone on the left thinks that pro-abortion is in the Constitution. What I think is this is what they're debating with the Constitution. They're debating the classic left versus right debate. You see Justice Scalia had these debates against other debates. Is like, if the people in the Constitution were around now, right, would they tell themselves this? You know, like imagine two partners go into a business deal, right? And later one is making money on the property and one's making money on the operations, but they went in together. And down the road, operations are doing way better. And that partner's like, oh my gosh, I messed up. First thing he does is he checks back his contract and sees, is there a way out?
Is there a way out?
That's what they're doing. Both sides are like, okay, we signed a contract in 1776 of how we're going to have this marriage between people and land, right? The land's going to spit us out or not, because if you don't work properly on the land and you plant too much crops, you won't have food. Like, and they wrote some agreement of how we're going to live here and how we're going to be united. Would they even say like, okay, we made a mistake, but would they give room for that change? Or are we messed up? Do we have to tear down the country? All that argument, I think is totally missing the boat of the argument. I personally believe that that's what George Washington meant when he read the Constitution. He said there's certain things that are never going to be in the Constitution. That's dark speech. There's certain things that you're not. And the question is this idea. I'm going to have to bring in a kids movie. I hope you don't mind.
Go for it.
Okay.
Listen, I have to say something. If you and I are having a conversation and you don't bring in a kids movie and quote Maimonides, it hasn't
then it's
happened.
Not a conversation.
It really hasn't. You are like you are go-to on that. The day that we sit down and you don't bring up Maimonides at a children's thing, I'm going to lean over and go, are you okay? Is everything all right at home? Because I'm going to be worried about you. That is consistent every conversation we've ever had.
This one, I really did my own research.
I could call you and be like, by the way, how do I get to Burger King from here? And you'd be like, Maimonides once said that you make a right. And by the way, Little Mermaid also said, like
you always got to make a right in life.
Yeah.
This one I stole from a bunch of different movies to put together, but there were two movies that were made after the book came. 3 movies that were made after the book came out. Sleeping Beauty. So the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty.
Right.
Something I think it's called The Snow Queen or something like that, and Frozen.
Okay.
3 different movies. Sleeping Beauty had one.
I've seen Sleeping Beauty. That's the only one I can see.
So that had one theology behind it or mythology behind it, and The Snow Queen. They all came. Traced, if you want to go as far back, I got it to Maimonides and Aristotle, believe it or not, that Aristotle writes about this in politics. But the easy one is the book that was written, I think it's called The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen. Okay. And the idea of the Snow Queen, which ended up being the movie that they made, which I forgot, I don't know who it played, and I don't know if it was a Disney movie or another, or Hollywood, whatever. But the idea was that there was these kids that were best friends. And Satan, what he used to do, he was a mirror. And he used to basically go show everybody the evil part of everyone else. So if I looked at you through Satan's mirror, I only saw the nasty part of you. Satan went up to God. I'm telling you, this is the book. Went up to God
to
show him the mirror, to look at his people through the mirror. And God smacked it away, and it broke into thousands of little different snow pieces, and it went into hearts of a lot of men. And those became tyrannical leaders. But this girl didn't give up faith. And she ran after him, and he wouldn't meet with him, and through the forest and all the demons that were there, that whole love story. And finally, I think she hugs him and she cries, and the tear goes into his body.
Him being a tyrannical leader.
The tyrannical leader melts the snow, the mirror that makes him see everything nasty. Okay. And now he sees her back to be the amazing person that she was.
So he sees He sees her in her totality, not just the dark part of it.
Exactly, and that's like the whole theme. It's a long book.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who read a lot about. I mean, Jordan Peterson built a lot on Sleeping Beauty.
I know that. Yes,
he built a lot on Sleeping Beauty.
You and I are both Jordan Peterson fans.
Oh, I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson.
Big time. Me too.
But what I have to do, because I learned in the universities that I learned, we can't read something without criticizing it. 100%. It's just the way my head's trained, and my mother's European, so I can't read anything without being critical. And I went to go search Hans Christian Andersen's work, and it ends off with a quote from the New Testament, which says, he asked his Lord and Savior, the Messiah, who's going to get to go in the Holy of Holies? Because in the temple there's the Holy, but the Holy of Holies is unique for one individual. It was Moses' brother. Moses wasn't allowed to go there. One time a year. During the second temple, since the priests were very corrupt and they bought their position, every high holiday, the high holiday when the priest went in, he died.
You told me this.
And they made some type of psychedelics that were going on, different perfumes. It was like a great. They always died in the second temple. They had to drag them out by the feet because nobody else was able to come in. They had to put chains and schlep. It was like a whole to-do.
Right.
And it was like the most spiritual place. God resides there, right? It's the place. Who's going to go in there? And he said, the innocent children who don't ask questions and have faith. So different than Judaism that said no.
Right.
Only one person, the high priest. Right. Innocent children who don't have faith. Then I started researching this. That individual who was following, his name was Peter. And the God of everything, right? The idea that God is rational and God exists in things, the God of everything, that it's very rational, that idea is called pantheism. And Peter Pan is Peter Pantheism, basically, is where a child doesn't want to grow up and realize that adults have a lot of complicated things, and adults are a little bit tyrannical. They're scary. They're Captain Hook, right? They have the time, the alligator of time. And when I thought about it for a long time, a pantheist is petrified of one thing. The God of rationale is petrified of the future. Because rationale is only what I know until now. Tomorrow or next week, something crazy might happen. So if I'm a God and I put out a book, I put out a book about God, ethics. This is what God wants, and it's very rational based.
Immutable truths.
No one's going to accept it 30 years down the road.
Right.
The God of a mystic is the God of everything and nothing. Like I said, like the idea that wisdom is in the study of nothingness. It's black speech. If you study nothing, rational pantheism, it's like panentheism is like that. It's like, and the mystics had this idea that the way they studied God and his ideas is that like we have to study everything and nothing also. And it was basically the idea of Peter Pan that you can't end up a child. You have to go through pain, and you have to study through pain, through the idea of pain. You have topics like abortion that you could study through the idea of like pain, through the idea of like studying nothing, through just being innocent and loving. And you know, if you hug that tyrannical person, then things are going to work. It's like the left is looking at the right as tyrannical individuals who want to control. I had a CEO from a huge bank call me yesterday, a huge bank. Didn't even call his lawyer. He told me these words. He says, we're a publicly traded bank. I believe that our general counsel wants to get us out, wants to get our position out. And we get an email from the general counsel of the bank that we have to put out a statement against Roe versus Wade. We have to put out, because if not, all staff are being advised to leave because of harassment, that they shouldn't feel that a man could just take advantage of them and then force them to keep the child. And I'm like, wow, that's an emotional argument. Like, they feel uncomfortable in the workplace. If that's your belief, it means you believe that you could take advantage of somebody and make them keep the child. And I'm like, but tell them you don't believe you can take advantage of somebody. Right. Like, soon it's going to be a normal topic. You can take advantage of ladies, and the whole question is, should they abort? Like, you're right. What ideas are we killing when we just say, you know what, pro-choice is 100% right without consequences? Sure. We're opening ourselves up to a tremendous amount of abuse without understanding how to stop it.
Sure.
So if this world is only 10 years old and we're not going to mature, and we don't have to be scared about 30 years from now, the future, then you're right. I would maybe also be pro-abortion because I would find every mental health issue or every reason that a person wants to abort, I would say that's a good enough reason. But if I'm worried what the consequences of those reasons are, so someone says it's a mental health issue, I'm like, okay, so if we're going to accept now universally that for such a mental health issue, even for you that it's important, it's anxiety, and for you anxiety is terrible, the community might now embrace that anxiety is a reason to abort. Now, if the community embraces that anxiety is a reason to abort, what are going to be my consequences? I believe rape's going to go up. I believe incest is going to go up.
I don't think anyone could rationally disagree with what you're saying. I think what you're saying is actually the Achilles heel of the left and the right. And that is, because I'm going to take your exact logic you just made and apply it to the gun issue, to school shootings. Because, we get to the issue of, well, how can we prevent people from shooting schools? Okay, or should people be allowed to buy guns? Well, how can we create a society where no one would want to buy guns? Why would you want a gun? Why would people feel they need a gun? Why would anyone need an abortion? No one takes pleasure in having an abortion, right? I've known many women who've had abortions. Now, not one of them speaks of it in a glowing fashion. Many of them, if they're being honest, speak to it in painful memory. And many of them say, I'm so glad I had that abortion. My life would have been irreparably damaged or changed in ways that, and again, that's speculation. There's no way to know what your life would have been.
But 100%.
But I think all of them would agree that the conditions that created the necessity of that abortion, if a woman says, I'm not going to have this baby because I can't afford to have this baby, the fact that we live in the year of our Lord 2022, that someone could say, I have to terminate a life because I can't afford to have, that's horrifying. There's an abundance in the world. There's no reason that should be happening. But that's a much harder question to answer.
How are we ever going to get there?
It's a much harder question.
So how are we ever going to get there? I think it's a big problem.
We have to, I think you're correct. Something we agree upon without question is the tougher question has to be answered.
And you can't do that with the way everyone's arguing now.
Well, you can't, but see, if argument is sport, right? Yeah. If argument is just team building, I just want people to go, you did great, Jim. All I have to do is come on with you right now and talk about women's rights are fundamental and
put me in a corner that I feel uncomfortable with.
And then you can turn around and make it look like I don't care about life and that I don't care about the sanctity of life, even though I'm a father, even though I'm a compassionate human being. We can vilify each other, we can weaponize logic against each other, but at the end of the day, I think we both know these are harder questions, right? And where we can agree as a first principle is that a 10-week-old fetus is something more than a collection of cells. We can agree on that. We both agree that this is something more than just any pro-choice, person who says, it's just a cluster of cells. We're being dishonest when we say that. We are.
I disagree with you.
Do you really?
Could I do something interesting? I heard this from a therapist, and it could be this is known before, but it really brought me awareness. She was telling me this idea called emotional vocabulary, which is basically that if you want to teach your child about abuse, right? You got to teach them you got to teach them certain words.
Sure.
And the way you start doing it is if your kid comes home from school and tells you, Dad, my teacher was stupid. Right. And you're like, why was your teacher stupid? Well, they kicked out John from school and John wasn't even the one who was wrong. Okay, so your teacher made a mistake. Okay, they made a mistake because they were misguided. And you start broadening their understanding because they need new words. Yeah. I think everyone's trying to figure out what the word for a fetus is, right? Is it a fetus? Is it a cluster of cells? I don't know if it's relevant to figure out what the word is. If we're trying to fight about what the idea behind it is, maybe, Maybe let's call this baby my mother calls me a cluster of cells. We're trying to
decide if it has rights.
Yeah, my mother calls me a cluster of cells, sometimes.
You are a cluster.
Exactly. So if we want to decide if it has rights or what it is, I think the argument has to go so much more back to some root to.
But it has to anyway. Come on, I don't have to be religious to
agree to that.
There is something inexplicable that happens when life is created. You can be the greatest molecular biologist in the universe. You can be the most intelligent person at Harvard Medical School. You can't explain to me how the spark of life begins. No one can. It's not knowable. It's like the existence or non-existence of God, the Big Bang, how it happened. This is the fundamental question of what does it mean to be alive? Why are we alive? And that's the part everyone's really scared of. We're really scared of the idea of look, what makes you alive? What makes something go from being nothing to being something? And do you have the right to take it from the something it's now become that we don't understand and put it back into what we think is nothing?
And define
which
it.
again is about death. We don't know about death either. I don't know, is that something now that has been brought into existence and then
we don't
stops
know if life is dying and dying is life.
We have no idea.
Clue.
So these are harder questions than you don't like women.
But
or
so
you don't
why,
like
so
babies.
who's pushing this innocent game that nobody should think, nobody should discuss what the real question is? I mean, Socrates was put to death when he said, guys, like they told him, you don't believe in any gods because you're asking too many questions. Right. And if you don't believe in gods, we don't know who you are. We have to put you to death. Right. And he's like, no, because I'm so smart, I'm asking questions.
But is the irretractable thing that we run into, the irretractable thing that you and I eventually run into in many of our discussions, and that is that fundamentally we come down to this place of, is there an omnipotent creator deity that had some intention when it created the universe? And that is, we'll never solve that.
Yeah,
we're not going to solve it.
But I don't think you have to. You
see, I think we're making the argument that you do have to if you really want to get to the bottom.
I don't believe a God would make you on, there's a great book written by someone named Aryeh Kaplan called If You Were God. It's about 30 pages long. It starts in the preface. It says, make believe there's an island that is controlled by your emotions, but nobody's allowed to know that. When people are misbehaving, there's thunder and there's this. And when people, how would you maintain a good land? What could you do? Then I'll let them know who you are, and it's all run by your emotions. Right. It's a very, very deep book. You have to be like, Google it. It's like they sell for like $10
I don't know if you ever read this series of books. One was called God, a Biography, and the other was called Christ, A Crisis in the Life of God.
That I didn't read.
By the way, we're going to run out of time here, so I just want
to. We should get like 5 more minutes.
Let's do 5 more minutes. Because we're going to have to continue.
Yeah, we're going to have.
It's going to have to be a part 2.
Of course, we're going to have to continue through abortions because I think if we push...
Just remember what you were wearing. We're both wearing the same thing we always wear. So
we'll continue different colors. Everyone can listen to it. We're going to continue. This is a complicated topic. First of all, I think people think they need to finish the topic within 5 minutes. If you need to finish the topic within 5 minutes, you can only scream.
Yeah.
You can't win a topic. It's like, no, you don't care about it. Okay, so it's not a 5-minute topic.
We could just do a soundbite version, though, where I say, you don't care about women, Rabbi, and then you go, Jim, you don't care about babies. And that would just be, we could put it up on social media. It would go viral very quickly. Maybe end with, like, you having me in a headlock, or I have you in the headlock and I'm pulling off the kippah, like I'll put it on my head or something. It'd be,
look, I think the coolest thing about abortion is that I think it's been the first topic of the world. It's been going on for thousands of years. Since literature's out, people wrote about abortion. The biblical text writes about abortion. Socrates wrote about abortion. Right. Everyone wrote about it. We're not going to answer it through arguing like 2-year-olds and not reading and not being educated.
It implicates all of these other huge questions.
100%.
All of these other huge questions about what is life, when does it begin, when does it end, what is more important, right, than the existence or non-existence? And then
what's your hierarchy of values?
And if you get into any like antinatalist, because I've read a lot of like antinatalist writing and like the harm of coming into existence and like all of the ideas of sort of pessimism. And the truth is I think there is an argument to be made about the harm of coming into existence.
100%. And I think we have to argue that out also. Yeah. The trauma of existence, we call it,
right,
which people suffer every day from. Why am I here? Right. Which is most of it leads to the majority of depressions. What's my meaning in life? Right. What's my purpose?
So you're saying we're not going to cover this and finish it in 5 minutes.
But I want to end up with this. If I have 5, we have 5 more minutes. I want to end up with this. There's this story that's written. I found this in a text written probably like 1,500 years ago that says this. That says Cain and Abel were one person. Cain killed Abel in himself. God came to him. There wasn't 2 individuals. And God came to him and said, where's your brother? And he says, I'm supposed to be watching for him. This is the way it's described. Okay, it's a very deep idea. So you know the biblical story about Cain and Abel?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to repeat it for the audience. It's very easy. So Cain and Abel decided they were both going to bring a sacrifice to God, which a sacrifice for God literally means how you understand God and what you understand God wants from you. Like Socrates would explain it. What's your highest value of idea in life is your God. Right. What are you willing to give up to attain it?
Right.
And it's known that Abel gave up the best thing. He gave the best from his sheep. Right. That was the idea. And Cain gave his second the best. Right. And God didn't accept it, whatever that means, how he knew that the God didn't accept it. Think about it. He didn't have proof, right? How the God didn't accept it. And when he killed Abel, God asked him, and first of all, this is the first time a human killed another human. This is, by the way, where abortion is learned out from, just to let you know, in the biblical text, because it says, God tells Cain from the future, you shouldn't kill a person in a person. And like the idea was, who's a person? And a person, that's a fetus. And that's the first time the text comes out where it's discussed. But God asked him, like, why did you kill? Like, who taught you about killing? And this is the way the idea is presented, and it's very deep. And I use this metaphor to come out against every organization that I don't like. When there's a problem, which means there's an idea that you're trying to attain. That's the definition of a problem. I could get up 3 in the morning. I could get up 4. I have a problem. I can't. So I have a higher idea than me that's criticizing me, asking me why I can't do that. Right. That's God. For everybody, that's their God. That's a Jung understood God. Right. That's a Freud understood God. It's the highest idea, my highest values. And I have to sacrifice myself. If my idea tells me you could get up before 8 in the morning, I got to sacrifice myself and my comfort and get up at 8 in the morning. Right. And if my highest idea says you can make money if you hustle, I'm going to learn how to hustle if it's uncomfortable. Right. I'm going to have to become uncomfortable to my highest idea. Sure. And I'm going to have to sacrifice. And then there are people who sacrifice their second best. They convince themselves that that idea is impossible to reach. Right. So they lower their standards of their idea, and they only sacrifice. They're like, I'm a good guy. I get it before 10 a.m. Right. Look, it's hard for me. But all that is killing an idea. It's killing your brother. Yeah. It's also killing it to such a high level because you're never going to attain that higher idea ever because you don't even know it exists anymore. You killed it. When we're having a conversation about abortion and we're just making the conversation about pro-choice or pro-life, I believe that's a form of idol worship. It's killing a higher idea, a higher conversation, a hierarchy, a higher God that we're not going to be able to attain. It's the story of Cain. It's like, you know what? Let's make this argument about something less so we could win the argument instead of reaching a higher understanding of a hierarchy of where humans could reach. And that's serving a strange God.
It's a harder question.
It's a harder question. And the government doesn't want us to ask us the hard questions for some odd reason. They're not letting us ask hard questions. I mean, they don't want people to talk. They don't want people to have conversations.
This is not what I thought your view on abortion would be. I
didn't share my view yet. We're not there.
You know, you played your cards really close to the vest on this one. And I was like, oh, this is like, I'm going to be pro-choice. He's going to be pro-life. We're going to come in. We're going to tussle a little bit. We got to read our talking points and boom. And you're coming at me with, you're coming at nothing's ever easy with you. But what I'll say is the fact that your response to this is, well, why aren't we asking the question of why would anyone want to have an abortion and why would conditions ever be created where a person would need to have one? And why aren't we asking those tougher questions? I don't know anybody on the progressive left who wouldn't agree with that. 100%. Who wouldn't go, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, why are people so economically burdened? Why are women alone and feel like they don't have a partner who's going to help them raise a child? Why don't people feel like they have community that they could have a child without a partner if they had to? Why would men not want to? Or why would people want to have a child and not be involved?
Why is there so much rape? Why is there so much abuse? Right. It's like the get, by the way.
But the answer is those are much harder questions to answer and much more multivariate equations.
We need to.
And in the interim, while we figure those things out, what do we do to the woman who's pregnant today?
You have to first make sure that you don't kill the higher idea. Because right away, when you answer that question, you could turn it to Cain and you could say, that higher thing is not relevant. It is. It doesn't mean you're there yet. Don't kill him. Don't kill your brother for bringing something more than you. Realize you're not there yet. It's slow. It's a slow, gradual step. Be Cain before you get to Abel. Get there. But I want to tell you more. When I see like divorce and people are like, we need prenups to get the get. Right. I'm like, are you asking the deeper question why men aren't giving gittin? Why the law was written like that? And I see these as like, I look at them as idol worships. When you come up with ideas and you destroy the higher idea, you're done in life.
Listen, you're solving for the side effect, not the underlying.
You know what Cain told God after he realized this? He said, this is one sin that's too hard to bear. Giving up on your hierarchy of values. And it's the only time it's ever mentioned in the biblical text. We did crazy stuff in the Bible. The only time it said a sin is too hard to bear is the sin of when you destroy your higher value and now you forgot what it is. You can never ever be happy because there's always going to be something missing in life. An extra meaning. You thought life isn't till here, but it's really till here. And there's so much meaning that you're missing to fight against the tragedy of life. You need that. You need God. You need ideas to fight the tragedy of life. And abortion is a much more important idea. And I think, of course, we're going to have to continue it. Many more topics because I think the topic of abortion is going to lead us to understand the topic of marriage, the topic of destiny. Yeah, so let's talk about abortion and argue about it for the next 10 shows. Because we could talk about divorce. We could talk about marriages. We could talk about abuse.
Well, the nature even of pair bonds and the necessity or non-necessity of pair bonds to the functioning of a child or the family unit to begin with. I mean, there's so much there. If you look at, I mean, this is the first time I've really thought about it through this lens because it's the first time you brought it up to me. You've been holding this one, I think. Yeah. But it really does get to the question of, okay, so why like that technology question that Neil Postman asks that I've always tried to apply to any technology I encounter, and that is, what is the problem to which this is a solution? What is the problem to which an abortion is a solution? Well, it's a problem of I'm pregnant and I don't want to be pregnant, right? But why? Like, why is a person pregnant and doesn't want to be pregnant?
If you think I got this at the spur of the moment, when the beginning,
you never have anything at the spur of the moment. You had to consult Maimonides and Walt Disney on everything.
More than that, I sent you a WhatsApp a while back.
Yeah.
3-4 months ago when abortion started becoming a topic.
Yes,
you didn't have time to listen to it.
Yeah.
The WhatsApp was one rabbi saying over a story.
You sent me that. Yes, I listened to it.
You listened?
I listened to it.
So what I wanted to send you, what I wanted you to hear, and I wish the audience.
I listened to it, and I actually thought to myself, because I'm listening to this rabbi talking, and I thought to myself, this is what Avi does in his free time.
Yeah, that's
he listens to, like, you spend all day with this, and then you're also in your free time listening to rabbis talking.
I go to events that he's at. I go speak to him in person. He's a brilliant person, a genius. But the idea and how he got emotional when he said that, and that was the coolest thing. Why was he emotional? This was a crazy idea. He was saying over a story, and we have to end with this. What was the story? I don't want to tell it to the audience. There was a story where a girl had it took her a long time to get married, a long time to become pregnant. Right. She finally became pregnant, was with a sick child. The doctor called up a rabbi in Israel and said, could she abort? And he said, I'm sorry, you know my opinion. I'm very pro-life. Right. And he was pro-life. He wrote about it. He wrote about it in details. Right. He didn't just speak about it and protest in the street. He wrote 40 pages about it. He spent years on the topic. The doctor said, could you think about it? The rabbi tells him, okay, no problem. The next day the doctor calls back and the rabbi tells him these words. He says, look, there's another rabbi who happens to be pro-choice in this situation. Tell her to call that rabbi. Don't even say my opinion. Right. That's a cool story because that doesn't exist in the right and left anymore. Yeah. I mean, someone on the right basically said, follow someone on the left. You don't have, I'm not God. Right. There's someone else. But the part that was amazing is the rabbi who burst out crying while he said that story because he understood what it means to have an opinion. Sure. And to give up your opinion to help somebody else. Sure. And that's a bigger topic than just abortion. When the right and left could argue in peace, when we could realize, yes, it's a complicated question. It's dark speech like Socrates says. If he couldn't figure it out, no one could figure it out. George Washington said the Constitution is dark speech. There are answers that are not there. The land has questions. We just have to show that we're not biased. And all we've been doing is showing that we're biased.
Well, and we have to approach, look, we think in generalities and we live in details. And so that, when I listened to that recording that you sent me of that rabbi's conversation, by bringing it back to the individual, by bringing it back to this story, by humanizing these theoretical concepts, these generalities, turning them into specific details, I mean, that's always the best form of advocacy because the reality is that we live in details. We live in, like, I sit down with you. This is why, the chasm between the right and the left has grown so much over social media because it's like road rage. It's incredibly easy to be mad at someone you don't have to sit across from and look at and talk to and humanize and know that, they're a human being that has, love in their heart. You're only, to use the whatever princess metaphor thing there, that to only see them through the mirror of their darkness and their evil, as opposed to looking at them and saying, okay, there's a person that has love in their heart and compassion in their heart. And this is a person who is trying to do the right thing. We disagree as to what we owe to each other. We disagree as to what we owe or how we define certain concepts. So that's the idea of arguing in peace, is to assume when we sit down together, not that we're going to agree, even to say we're probably not going to agree on all or some or big topics or little topics, but that we're going to assume the other person is working from a place of good faith. We're going to let that person be heard. And we're going to try to understand. Like, that's the thing. It's not just to be understood. I'm going to try to understand. I want to understand what you're saying. I want to understand what lies beneath that, what assumptions lie beneath that. And by the way, when I challenge you, when you challenge me, I mean, one of the things that's made our friendship to me very valuable is you're constantly making me think not just about my opinion on things, but what informs that opinion? How did you come to that? You're constantly Socratesing me. You're constantly like making me this Socratic method of, yeah, but why? Yeah, but why would that? Well, what is that from? Where does that come from?
That's because my mother's a therapist.
Is that what it is?
No, I'm not joking.
God, I gotta hang out with your parents, man.
Like,
I really,
why are you doing that?
Every time you talk to me about your parents,
I'm like,
I feel like I need to come hang out with them.
But look, I don't know why people became against looking through things through the critical lens. When I took a high school Regents, we actually had on our language test something called a critical lens study. They gave us a story and they say, look it through this lens. Yeah. And look it through this lens.
But it's harder. It's harder and it's scary. So lazy. It's scary because if these things are true, right? Like, it makes you question things that it's just easier. The world is simple when there's good guys and bad guys.
Yeah.
The world is simple when there's very clear lines.
Now I get to quote Nietzsche. Because his book was about
we must be finished now. You get to quote
beyond
Nietzsche.
good and evil. We got to start looking things beyond good and evil. No, that's it. That's it for him. But yeah, you're 100%
Well, listen,
right.
we have to continue this conversation.
Continue
this is not one that could ever be
next one's going to be at your
sit
office.
down. All right, next one's at my office. Sounds good. I'll make the
You guys will get to see James' office.
That's right.
Very scary place. Don't look in there without reading.
I pretty much live there. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Argue in Peace. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please consider leaving us a review and subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is that you listen or watch. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Also, feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Get in touch in the comments or, of course, on our social media. See you next week for a brand new episode of Argue in Peace.